Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Justice, and I'll be your moderator for this session with author Alicia Witt. And before we bring Alicia in, I'd like to do just a little bit of housekeeping stuff and welcome you on behalf of Humanities Tennessee. If you are watching on Facebook Live or YouTube and want to ask a question, please do. Those will get to me if you just leave those in the comments. And I will reserve some time at the end for Q&A too, if we have more questions at the end. I'd like to remind you all that the wonderful local Nashville bookstore, Parnassus Books, is the bookseller for the festival, and purchases of books will help keep the festival free. And there should be a link to buy, I think, at the top of the chat. The festival is free and nonprofit, so if you are enjoying it and want to support, you can do that on the app or at the website at humtn.org. So now I will introduce our author, Alicia Witt.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm going to tell folks a little bit about you. And man, we could fill this whole time talking about your career trajectory. It is remarkable and amazing. So, actor and songwriter Alicia Witt got her start at age 7 in David Lynch's sci-fi classic Dune. Most recently, you might have seen her in I Care a Lot, with other recent credits including Orange is the New Black, The Walking Dead, ABC's Nashville, and many others. Films such as Two Weeks Notice, Last Holiday, Vanilla Sky, Mr. Holland's Opus, and others, and is well known to the Hallmark Channel for Christmas movies since 2013. And most recently has a new album out September 24th, which is just 2 weeks ago, and is on tour back in Nashville just for a moment and then back on tour. And then 2 weeks later, after the album, comes the book. So, wow, you have been so busy. And just to remind you again, Small Changes, a rules-free guide to add more plant-based foods, peace, and power to your life. So you have been so busy, it sounds like.
Yes, I have been very busy, and I feel way more awake and exhilarated than the amount of sleep I've had would indicate. And that's because it just feels so good to be getting out there in front of people, playing shows again, talking about this book that I've been dreaming of putting out into the world and working on for quite a while now. And it's all just, the fact that it's all coming out at once is unexpected, but it feels great.
Well, and I wanted to ask first, I feel like, you've done so much, you're doing so much, and then to add author to all of that, it tells me that this must have been a really important message to you that you wanted to get out. So would you tell us a little bit to start about the inspiration in writing it, why you wanted to write the book?
I started having these conversations with people about 10 years ago or so. And, I am 99.5% plant-based myself, but I firmly believe that there is no one right way for everybody. I have my reasons for eating this way and living this way, but I never set out to tell somebody else how they should live their life. But to my surprise, these people who would approach me perhaps to say that they recognized me from something or just starting conversations, they were starting to ask me questions about what I was eating or what I was doing or why I seemed so happy and so peaceful. And I never thought about being somebody that would give advice, or, as I say in the book, I feel like I'm an accidental guru, because I'll have these conversations and then I hear later, oh, I started using that product you told me about, or I started making that recipe, and now I'm doing X, Y, and Z changes. And it all started with that. So that's where the idea came from. I thought, I think I have a way of talking to people about this stuff that is not lecturing. I'm not putting any labels on it. I don't like labels myself anyway. And then a book a book agent came along and asked if I had any ideas for a book. And we'd started developing it. And it just so happened that while the pandemic was just taking hold of the world last year and we were all shut down, I had the offer from Harper's to write the book. So what better time to create something that hopefully would help make a difference in somebody's life, and not focus on all that was going on and all that I couldn't control.
Yeah, love that. I love this small changes approach because I feel like so often we live in this black and white, all in or all out society. And I think for me personally, and I haven't really even talked about this very much. I've written about food for 15 years in Nashville. I have a cookbook with fried chicken on the cover, a whole section on meat, and I have not had any meat this year. Yeah,
How do you feel?
really good. But I've dipped into, only times of fully plant-based and then out of it. So I've appreciated the small changes approach that you take. So I'm like, okay, that's okay. I'm just finding my way. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, because it's also so important. I talk to a lot of people who say, yeah, I tried, quote unquote, going vegan 2 years ago, and I was so hungry all the time, and I became anemic, and I clearly can't be vegan. And I think it's interesting how there's so many ways to go about a plant-based diet, some of which are very unhealthy. It still has to have balance and nutrition and all the good stuff in it for you to feel satiated. It sounds like you're doing that
yeah,
with this time.
I'm always amazed when people think that you're not eating things. And I've noticed in your book, you were like, you have to eat. I mean, there's so much to eat. And I had a friend who said, how are you going to write about food when you can't eat a chicken wing? And I thought, oh my gosh, there's so many things that, you can eat. But I wondered about the small changes approach that you take. Is that partly because it did take, I read that you started to go without red meat at a young age. And then, so did it take, you know, small changes for you over the past 20 or so years to get to where you are?
It was exactly like that. The red meat was the first thing that I had just a personal conviction I didn't want anymore because I didn't like the idea of eating it. I started cooking when I was about 13 or 14, and I suddenly saw this thing for what it was. And I had grown up eating meat pretty much twice a day. And all of a sudden I just thought, oh, I don't want that anymore. And I never did again. But I continued to eat everything else. And then when I was 25, I had this secondary, very gradual realization that I didn't like chicken or turkey anymore. I tried. I had these sort of gradual moments where I would order something I'd always had, like a half roasted chicken or a turkey burger, and find myself way more excited about the vegetables on the plate. And then what finally did it weirdly was my puppy's belly at the time. I just sort of saw a part of his belly that reminded me of a chicken wing. And so for me, that was the end of that. And I continued being pescatarian until I was, about 11 years ago, I think. And then in a similar way, I had a few months of particularly heavy, indulgent eating, lots of butter, fried foods, shrimp. I worked in New Orleans on a movie and enjoyed it so much. But then I thought, okay, I'm about to do another movie. I don't want to start the movie feeling sort of weighed down. My skin was breaking out, all of that. And I did this 3-week plant-based cleanse with herbs. And the only stipulation was you just have to stick to plants for that time. And at the end of that, I was utterly shocked to discover I didn't want sushi or cheese or eggs. I just did not plan on that. I never thought I would be vegan. And finally, I accepted that as well, with the occasional exception of salmon. Once in a while, I just get a craving for salmon, and I think that's my body's way of saying, you should eat some salmon. So I do.
Well, and I like that approach that it doesn't have to be, in a box, like that you can do these things that you feel like your body needs, follow your intuition and all of that. So we have a question here. You
Yeah.
live in the South now, which is not known for healthy eating. Are there Southern foods you enjoy or have adapted to suit your diet?
That's a great question. I have been impressed, not just in the South, but also all around the country. There are a number of vegan soul food restaurants. For example, in DC, where I was just playing on tour, I didn't make it to this location, but I distinctly remember last time I was there in 2019, there was a phenomenal vegan soul food. So it had everything you would expect from a Southern, spicy, savory, creamy kind of a meal. And it's got no meat and no dairy in it. There's a place called Southern V here in Nashville that makes some great Southern soul food. And in terms of, I'm trying to think of what would qualify as a Southern dish per se. I mean, I grow watermelons here in my backyard, and I'm always using watermelons in various summer drinks or salads. I make a mac and cheese that is pretty great. And it's also very simple. It's a stovetop mac and cheese, so you don't have to put it in the oven. It doesn't take too long to whip up. And
Is that
that recipe's in the book, yeah.
Yeah, when people ask me what is Southern food, a lot of times I say it is vegetables because of backyard gardens and being so centered around agriculture. Now, at meat and threes, that might mean that there's some pork fat in the vegetables, but
Yes, exactly.
still, vegetables are, I think, important to this area, thankfully.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I really appreciate your conversational tone in the book because it does feel like you're just saying to a friend, this is how I do it. This is what works for me. This is my path, not like you must do it this way, like you mentioned earlier. And I love that there are nuggets of wisdom about balance, flexibility, moderation. And I think so many of us struggle with that. So I wonder, especially working for so long in the entertainment industry, which can be brutal, I think, about body image and that kind of thing. How have you gotten to this place of balance, moderation that seems so healthy now? So how did you get to that place?
That's also been a series of small changes.
Okay.
For sure. And I love talking to my friends who have known me for a long time, because what you're observing is true. There's a sense of balance and peace, and also utter freedom that I have now that I didn't used to feel. I know part of that comes with just maturing as a human being and a woman, and you start realizing that your worth is so much more vast than whatever you look like on the outside. But the funny thing is, when you stop worrying so much about what you look like on the outside, you look better too. You just do. There are certain things, for example, I knew I was doing this panel today, and I could have taken a nap. I planned on taking a nap before it because I just got back from Charlotte a few hours ago. But I also realized it's been a few days since I have done a little core strength exercise being in the tour van. And so instead of taking a nap, I spent 25 minutes doing some of the free weight exercise routines that are in the book. I didn't want to at first. I wanted to take a nap. But I am so glad I did, because it gave me energy. And now I feel like tomorrow isn't going to be 4 days in a row that I didn't do that. The consistency is really important, especially when my days are not consistent and not structured. So that's an example. I try to do something every single day that is going to get my heart rate up and keep my muscle tone strong. And that helps with my mental state as well. And I also try to meditate at least once a day, even if I don't have long, just to hopefully connect to the reason why I'm here. And if it's a chaotic day, I want to remember it's chaotic because all this exciting stuff is happening. And that's really true for almost anybody. If you're having a busy life, it's because you're blessed.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine the meditation and the exercise that leads to the balance or helps with the balance.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. We have another question here. How much of your vegan life is about personal health and how much about concerns about the environment?
It's both. It's hard to measure which is which at this point, because I love the way I feel eating the way that I do. And also, the more I learn about how detrimental the mass industry around factory farming in particular is to the environment, the more glad I am that I'm not partaking in that. I also know that for a lot of people, especially right now in the age of a pandemic and people feeling like they need to take their health into their own hands, I think more than ever. And people want to be as strong as they can be, so that their immune system is able to fight not only this, but also whatever might be around the corner. Mm-hmm. So my idea is that rather than tell somebody who is currently eating meat 2 or 3 times a day what that's doing to the environment, I would rather gently tell them, I know what that's doing to your body, and here's how you can be healthier. And then as they start to go down that road, I think maybe they'll be a little more open to hearing about how not only is it helping me, but it's also helping the world around me. Mm-hmm. I feel like it needs to start maybe with the individual, though, mm-hmm. and their family. A lot of people are hearing from their doctors, you need to cut back on the cholesterol, you need to lose some body mass. Diabetes the rates of diabetes are so high. Mm-hmm. And studies show that all 3 of those specific ailments have a whole lot to do with consuming too much that is animal based. And I think if people could significantly cut back on their animal product consumption, they wouldn't need to completely cut those out of their diet. I think what's daunting to somebody who's eating meat 2 or 3 times a day and dairy and all of it is, well, I don't want to. I like these foods. Life is too short. I don't want to give those up. And I get that. So I'm hoping I can help offer some other options, and then they can still eat the foods they love, at least in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And it's exciting to me.
Yeah, I'm still new to this, like a vegetarian lifestyle, but I'm feeling like people have an entry point that can be different for everyone. For me, it was labor. So I work at a nonprofit also called the Nashville Food Project, and we work with farmers who also, many of them are refugees and immigrants, and they work in, meat processing plants. And we all know that that's not a great environment to work in. And then when COVID came along, there are hot spots for COVID, and so that was the entry point for me. I was like, I just can't, I don't want to support this labor practice anymore. But then, it gets into the health and then into the climate stuff. And so, yeah, it's interesting how everyone has a different point of entry, basically.
That's
Um,
beautiful. Yeah, that was hard to hear about.
mhm,
And not just the labor, but also because of the outbreaks that happened because of the labor and the cramped working conditions, just the hundreds of thousands, I think millions of animals that were slaughtered and went to complete waste. They didn't even die to provide food for somebody.
mm,
That is heavy. Um, I think if we could reduce the meat consumption overall, then the lives of those animals would also greatly improve, and then the meat source would improve drastically as well. But I'm glad you came to that from that small change.
yeah, it's been interesting. So I have another question I want to ask you about boundaries, because I feel
Yeah.
like that's another area that's universally difficult for everyone, no matter what sort of lifestyle you follow. Um, how do you it I feel like in the book you have a very respectful way of saying, okay, this is the way that I'm going to eat. And I think a lot of that is about also being prepared. I love these stories about having beans on set with the
Yes.
on set. So can you talk about boundaries and how you manage that?
Yes. Yes. It's there's a strength that comes from knowing that you have to sort of lay the groundwork in my line of work anyway. On the first few days on a set, I I am very vocal about what I need to eat. And there are some sets where I don't even need to be because they already have a chef or a caterer that is very accustomed to preparing plant-based options that have protein in them and lots of green vegetables. Those are the two things that I absolutely require. And healthy fats, avocados. So if I show up on a set and the vegan option is potatoes and oatmeal and pasta with plain tomato sauce on it, and you get the idea, then I have to say, well, I appreciate the effort, but this isn't going to work for me. I'm going to order something today. Or here's a carton of beans that I brought with me. Could you scramble these up with some, they usually have spinach or broccoli. And I'll say, could you add some spinach and broccoli and some garlic and some olive oil and just cook that all up for me? And that would be perfect. And they're like, oh, that's okay. Yeah. And then presto, that's a delicious and filling and protein rich plant-based meal. So that starts the ideas about what direction the food would ideally go in. But it's important to know, and this applies to whatever line of work I think somebody's in, being outspoken about what you want when you go to a restaurant, or if you're in an office environment where there's a catering option or a cafeteria or whatever that might be. It is taking care of yourself to speak up for what you want. And I think in most circumstances, food providers want to make their customers happy. And we are all learning about this together. So if you go to your favorite restaurant and you make a request, they can usually go out and buy whatever it is you want at the grocery store. Not in the moment, I mean, but if it's a place you go to every week, you can say, hey, I really like Beyond Burgers. What if you started carrying that on the menu? I would order that. The same way that you can now go to Starbucks and get an Impossible Burger. It's not a vegan Impossible Burger. It has cheese on it, but still, it's a meat option. That's a direct result of people walking in and then walking back out again because they wanted something different. Mm-hmm. And I also love that when I speak up about what I'm wanting in that way, it inspires the people around me and empowers them to do the same thing, and also gives the people preparing the food new ideas about how to put stuff together that doesn't have meat or dairy in it, but is still filling. Because the thing is, if anyone eats a big plate of pasta with plain tomato sauce at lunchtime, you're going to start getting pretty sleepy about an hour and a half later because it's a whole bunch of carbs, unless you're going out to run 6.5 miles or something.
Well, and I loved your story about, I believe it was on set at Hallmark when people started to see your meals, and even the non-vegan people were like, "Ooh, what's that? Can we have that?" And I think that's what happened with the Titans football team, because one of the players, do you know about this whole?
Yes, I do.
And started to see Charity Morgan's food that she made for her husband who played for the Titans, and then Titans players started to eat vegan because her food looked so amazing. So can you tell us a little bit about that, like how fun it was to probably see that happen?
Oh, yes. Well, there was one instance, I I tell the story in the book about this one Christmas set where on day 2, the craft services gal that craft services is on a set, somebody who comes around and brings snacks at a certain time of the day. And it's supposed to be like a sandwich or a cup of soup or something to tide you over till lunch. And she brought me a special vegan sandwich, knowing that I was vegan. And I looked at it, and I was talking to my friend Josh, who was one of the producers, and I was like, I think this might be just lettuce and tomato. And I opened it up, and we both started laughing so hard. We had tears rolling down our face. And he said, they gave you an LT. And they did. It had nothing on it. No condiments, nothing. It was a huge bun, like this big. And inside of it were 2 slices of lettuce and 2 slices of tomato. So I didn't want to be rude, but that was an example where I needed to speak to her and say, I appreciate the effort, but this is just not gonna, I can't eat this because I'm gonna get really sleepy, and it's a lot of bread. So we came up with a snack, which was falafel, which she had on the trailer, a little hummus, some chopped up spinach, and a few avocado slices. And that is a perfect snack. And when she made that for me, then my co-star wanted one, and then crew members wanted that. And it just became a thing that was offered from that point on. Well, like about a week into it, when everybody was asking for them. That's delightful. And it happens at lunchtime and at dinner time. It happens when I go out to eat with friends, and they're not necessarily plant-based. Most of my friends are not. And we'll go out to eat, and I'll concoct something off of the menu, or sometimes just order whatever option the restaurant has that's plant-based. And my friends who ordered whatever they got look over and they're like, oh, I wish I'd ordered that. That looks so good. And then they'll text me from that restaurant whenever they go back to it and say, I just ordered what you had because you got it that time, and it's delicious.
Well, we have a couple more questions here in the chat that I want to ask. And one of them I remember you addressed in the book, considering a plant-based lifestyle. Should you
Mhm.
expect an increase in grocery budget, or can it be done relatively economically?
It can be done relatively economically. Depends on what you're buying. If you're buying a lot of deli prepared items, or if you're going to the Whole Foods prepared food counter, that's very costly. But
Mhm.
it's much the same if you buy the non-plant-based items at Whole Foods. um, if you want to increase your bean intake, for example, beans are one of the most inexpensive things you can buy. I mean, they're cheap enough if you want to buy them in cans or cartons, but cooking dried beans from scratch is not a big deal. You can do it. You soak them overnight and then you cook them the next morning. It takes like an hour. And some beans, like chickpeas, you don't even need to soak first. You can go from totally dry to totally cooked within an hour. And they taste so much fresher than something from the can. And I mean, they're so inexpensive. You can buy massive bags of them for very cheap. Whereas if you're buying good quality meats, those are extremely costly. Now, if you're buying meat that is mass produced and has chemicals in it and was fed often non-vegetarian diets, like a lot of chickens are fed food that is partly made from ground up waste parts of other chickens. So that's not good for us. If you were then going to instead have organic vegetarian fed chicken, that's going to be more expensive than the mass produced chicken. Beans are less expensive than that. If you buy something like a Beyond Burger, those are sort of mid range, and you can buy all sorts of gourmet items that might be expensive, but then any gourmet item is. I I don't think it's I really don't think it's more expensive. You can create your own vegan burgers as well. I have a recipe for a black bean burger that I estimate maybe costs $1.50 total for all of the ingredients to make two of them. And I also figured out, I think I calculated it right. I went to great lengths to measure what a slice of typical pizza with all the toppings, um, a freezer made vegan pizza, and then a homemade vegan pizza might cost. And I think the vegan pizza that you make at home is the cheapest of all of them.
Well, and I do think it's a little bit of a learning curve on that front. For example, one of my favorite vegan products that I need to learn to make because it is pretty expensive is bitchin sauce. Have you had it's called bitchin sauce from, it's almond sauce,
Yeah.
basically, with, uh,
Yeah.
yeast, and I'm like, "Okay, I love this, and I wanna put it on everything, but, I probably can't buy this all the time." So,
Yeah.
there's learning that has to happen, I guess, in
That's
this.
a great example. And something like that is pretty easy to make. I I mean, you'd need to soak the almonds overnight. And then when you soak the almonds like that, you can pinch each one and the skin just pops right off.
Oh, wow.
And then you're left with the inside of the almond, which is the creamy part.
Hmm,
And I'm guessing you'd add a little nutritional yeast, a little seasoning, a
oil.
little bit of oil, maybe. Um, yeah, that's a good example. The mac and cheese that I mentioned earlier is made with cashews.
Hmm,
Um, and nuts are reasonable, they're on the higher end of things, but they're not like crazy expensive. The same with avocados. They when you go to a restaurant and you order a side of avocado, they charge you for that. But you can buy them in the grocery store and they're not they're not really that expensive when you consider how good they are for you. And if you had I don't think you could ever find an avocado more expensive than say $2.99 for a huge one. You could cut that in half and eat half of it one day and half another day. And that's really not expensive. I was also going to say, when you go to a restaurant, most of the time, I'm thinking of places that are not fancy, like a Thai restaurant or a place like that where you have the option to add meat to the stir fry or add something like tofu. The tofu is usually the least expensive. And then the price goes up if you're adding meat, chicken, or fish. So eating out, you can actually, in fact, a lot of times when I eat out with my friends who are ordering something like a steak or fish or whatever, I will ask to have a separate check because my bill was so much less than theirs. It's not fair to divvy it up at that point.
Okay, so we've got just about 10 minutes, but questions are coming in. So if people have questions, I'm just gonna keep asking questions, but also bounce over here to the chat and ask a few of these questions too. And one of them here is just biggest misconceptions about a vegan or plant-based lifestyle that you would want to dispel for people.
I think the biggest one is that it doesn't taste good, that it's boring, that you eat nothing but plain lettuce leaves all day and carrots. People still, to this day, people still make fun of that way of eating because they don't understand it. There was a fellow at the show last night who was, I don't know what to say about him, but he shouted out at one point, "Yeah, I was going to bring you flowers, but you would have eaten them." People are amazed when they see what I eat and how much I eat. I am constantly eating, and I'm eating delicious things, not plain green salads. I don't like plain green salads. So that's probably the biggest misconception. That's what I'm hoping to help dispel with this book. And also the idea, the other big misconception is that vegans lecture you all the time. And I don't do that. And I think it's maybe one of the reasons why people make fun of them. Yeah. So let's do away with the labels and the ideas about all that.
So another question is, if you get discouraged with eating vegan, what should you do? And I would add to that, I think you do a great job in the book of talking about, if you decide to have cheese or you decide to have eggs or, that's not the end of the world. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I mean, that's a big question. If you get discouraged with being vegan, what should you do? I think it depends on what aspects of it you're getting discouraged by. Are there certain foods you're craving like crazy that are not good for you? Is it that you're hungry? Are you not seeing the physical results of what you imagined you might experience, like weight loss or energy level is not increasing? And then I would think there's probably some adjustments that can be made within what you are eating. Because again, just being plant-based doesn't mean you're being healthy. You could eat nothing but vegan ice cream all day and technically be vegan, but that would be terrible for you. So, and trust me, some days I want to, but I don't. So I would say those are the questions to ask. And then I think carbs can be a big part of it, because a lot of people who make that switch increase their carbs drastically. And carbs are going to weigh you down and make you feel heavier and lethargic, whether they're vegan or not. So I would suggest increasing the green vegetables, but make them more enticing and delicious. I love garlic and olive oil and salt. And someone else asked what spices. That's another key to making vegetables taste incredible. I love cardamom. It's got such an unexpected flavor when you add it to something like tomato salad, or to sauteed carrots. I love onion powder as well. It's a way of making you feel like you're eating something that's not good for you, especially when you add it to some really high quality oils. And one of my favorite things to eat on a regular basis is a huge bowl of steamed broccoli with pesto that I make, which is in the book. And I just crave that. I love it. It fills me up. And I love how it tastes. So then I have the sensation of eating something like a pizza that isn't a pizza. I'd say things like that. And then if all else fails, you can also do genetic testing to find out if there's foods you might be eating that you have sensitivities to.
I've thought a lot more about texture,
Yeah.
important that is, and how fun it is to think about all the different ways you can add some different textures to food, um, in a plant-based way. Um, so I wanted to ask, if you were to create a meal out of the recipes in your book that was like the showcase of, sort of like your, I hate to say gateway meal, but the meal to where you could showcase a plant-based diet that would really wow folks, what would you put together?
Well, I'm thinking of the cream of broccoli soup, or the sweet potato and turmeric soup,
Mm.
because those are, you just serve them and people can't believe there's no cream in them. And then they're just filled with flavor, and that always goes really quickly when I serve it. So I would make that. I might make the creamy mushroom tagliatelle,
Mm.
or I might make the lasagna, or depends. I think, yeah, one of those would be great. And maybe a nice side of sauteed spinach, or some, I don't know, some asparagus, with just a little olive oil and salt and garlic powder, or fresh garlic. Um, and then I would definitely finish it with the avocado mousse,
Mm.
the chocolate. I should say chocolate mint mousse. I shouldn't have led with avocado. I wouldn't do that. I would just say, here's a chocolate mint mousse for you. And lo and behold, it is made with avocado, but you would never know. And that means it's raw, it's filled with good fats, it is creamy and decadent. And I also use dark chocolate, which is dairy-free. So you get the good antioxidants of that dark chocolate. And that person would leave my house very stuffed and very happy. And and I bet they would have some new ideas about what a plant-based meal could be like.
Awesome. Well, I'm very interested in the bolognese, and you call it something bolo. I think you have.
So I call it bolognese. Paula calls it bolognese. Paula's bolognese is incredible. It's bolognese, but it's not regular bolognese. And she generously let me use it in the book. And she had to painstakingly make it several times, because she's been making it for years and had no idea what the ingredients were. I mean, the measurements of the ingredients. So that is a special bolognese. People flip out for that one. It is the most time-consuming recipe in my book. One thing I wanted was for most of these to be pretty quick, because when I get hungry, I tend to want to eat pretty quickly. But Paula's bolognese is excellent, worth the time. It tastes so much like meat sauce, you won't believe it. And you can put it in the freezer. So that's a great thing to make lots of.
Well, now that everyone is probably hungry, because I know
Yes.
water too, this is probably a good time for us to finish up. But thank you so much for the conversation and all the advice, read the book, and good luck back out on tour also.
Thank you. I'm playing here in Nashville at City Winery tomorrow night.
Awesome.
So it's a joy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure talking to you.
You too. Thank you.
Right.